What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Tsunade forced Naruto kill Hinata? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. Tsunade hated diplomatic missions. When she got back home she would have a mountain of paperwork to do and reports to read. Sure, she got to relax in luxury at the village's expense, but she wasn't allowed to gamble. No gambling and piled up paperwork, that's what these missions meant to her. The mission was over now and in the end she wasn't even needed. She just sat there in her official capacity while various daimyos settled everything. Official capacity as a seat warmer she must. It had been a complete waste of her time, and now she would have more paperwork. She hated paperwork. They were halfway home traveling on footpaths through the forest. The plan had been for her escort to be all female so as not appear important or suspicious. While on the main roads they had all dressed the part of lower-class women on a trip. They dressed normally now that they were on the less traveled footpaths through the forest. Tsunade had left Shizune in Konoha. As two of the best medical ninja she felt it best she leave at least one in Konoha at all times. She had brought her apprentice Haruno Sakura who was walking in front of her. The young woman behind her was Hyuga Hinata. She had grown as much as Sakura had. When Tsunade had first met Hinata her looks had just screamed, "Squeeze me, I'm cute." Since that time Hinata had gotten taller and her cuteness had melted into a soft, elegant beauty. Hinata had been without a team since her two teammates Kiba and Shino had both become Chunin last year. Tsunade hadn't been able to find a team for her so she had been assigned to various teams and missions since then. Tsunade had brought Hinata as well as her former Junin team leader Kurenai to round out her escort. She really needed to do something about Hinata. She felt bad about her failure to get her assigned to a new Genin team. But truth be told Hinata was well qualified to be a Chunin herself if she just had a little more confidence. Her combat skills had grown over the last 2.5 years to bring her well above Genin combat level. She had a tendency to unbalance teams. Most genin deferred to ninjas more powerful than themselves. They just didn't know how to react to a ninja twice as powerful as themselves that always acted so submissive. It had a tendency to ruin the team's whole dynamic. Tsunade had been forced to juggle her around teams. Consequently Hinata had managed to save 3 different teams during failed missions. Hinata never seemed to get past the dejection of another failed mission to realize she had single-handedly saved her teammates' lives. Tsunade looked back at the shy genin behind her. She was walking with her head down exuding a lack of confidence. Even her cloths she chose to wear broadcasted it. The girl always wore a baggy sweater over her shirt to hide her figure. The poor girl wasn't very well endowed and it seemed that she was self-conscious about that as well. She should probably slap the puberty fairy. Tsunade toyed with the idea of showing her a jutsu that would enhance the size of some of her particular assets, but there was a risk that if they grew in later that she would be noticeably artificially big. Well, if Hinata didn't feel comfortable accepting accommodations for saving the lives of her teammates, because their mission had failed she probably wouldn't take unnatural enhancement well either. She glanced back at Kurenai before looking forward. Tsunade had discussed Hinata's lack of confidence with her in hopes that as Hinata's former instructor she would know how to help. They had never come up with anything, though Tsunade knew she was holding something back. When she had asked what she wasn't telling her Kurenai simply said that it was currently impossible to use and they would have to find something else. Surely the girl didn't feel weak. There were currently only 2 or 3 genin that Tsunade could think of that might be on her level. How had Shiryu described her? He said she was like a force of nature, she just kept getting back up. Konohamaru had said she was like a monster. Tsunade was sure that he meant that as a compliment, but she would have to talk to him about you do and do not speak about someone who had saved your life. Maybe she could use Hinata's grasp of politics to help her. It had after all been Hinata's idea whispered into her ear and then quickly relayed to the daimyo that had saved the talks. Shinobi were seldom used for diplomacy, but perhaps she could find a way. She was idly wondering if she could make helping with her paperwork sound like a reward when she suddenly realized that they weren't alone. Someone was up ahead of them. She narrowed her eyes as she saw him. "Oi, I promised to kill you, didn't I?" They had just entered a small clearing when she had spotted him and those words had come out of her mouth completely unbidden. Tsunade's words caused Sakura, who had just finished turning around, to jerk, causing her hand to miss the kunai in her holster. Sakura had never heard her sensei speak in such a scary voice. Her voice was almost dripping with hate. Sakura was taken aback. This person was a sound ninja, but what could he have done to upset Tsunade so badly? Sakura apparently wasn't the only one who was surprised. Hinata spoke up hesitantly. "Anyo, what did he do?" the shy girl asked. "Surely you can't still be mad about that," the silver-haired traitor yelled. "You can't expect us to go through all the effort to bring two people back if you don't fulfill your half of the bargain," continued the sound ninja as if lecturing. Tsunade's response came in almost a whisper. "You almost killed him," she growled with her head hung down. Her voice, while barely audible, seemed to be dripping with even more venom than before. Her companions were anxious and confused. Kabuto desperately wanted to keep her talking and off balance while he figured out a way to escape while still being close enough to pick up his intended targets. Then he heard her response. "What?" he asked incredulously. "You know that demon must be destroyed before it falls into the wrong hands or decides to go on a rampage on its own." Kabuto yelled back instantly as if it were the obvious thing. "That boy is not a demon," Tsunade replied, her voice growing louder and bolder by the moment. "He is a brave shinobi of the leaf." Her head jerked up as she yelled the last few words out. "Sensei," Sakura interrupted cautiously. "Who are you talking about?" Kabuto's voice rang out in response. "I can't understand why you let that thing live. Not only that, but you keep such a dangerous secret from your own children." Turning to face Sakura, Kabuto's face took on a conspiratorial-looking grin. "You see, little girl, you will not tell her." Tsunade's voice rang out interrupting him. "Tell her that her friend Naruto is a demon," Kabuto taunted. "Or that the fourth was such a weakling that he couldn't defeat the Kyuubi and had to seal him away inside a baby boy," Kabuto continued. Tsunade seemed to become even more agitated at these words. Perfect, Kabuto thought. If he could push her more, he could be able to escape cleanly. Or am I not supposed to tell her that every time she's been around him she has been in constant danger of being killed by that demon inside him? Sakura was dumbstruck. Hinata looked shattered, and it was all that Kurenai could do not to rush over and embrace the poor girl. "Poor Naruto," the little girl mumbled almost inaudibly before her voice was drowned out by the Hokage's reply. "The fourth seal isn't so weak. That monster was permanently imprisoned inside of him. There is no way he can ever be released, and there is no danger that he will take over Naruto," the Tsunade's voice screamed out in reply. "That silly girl actually looks relieved," Kabuto thought, looking at Sakura. Noticing Tsunade's eyes had all but glazed over, Kabuto determined that this would be his best chance to escape without conflict. "Believe what you like, but don't worry. If you are too weak to do what's needed, we'll take care of it," Kabuto said while turning. "You will not leave." The deep woman's voice was powerful and commanding. It sounded more like it had come out of the throat of a beast than a woman. It froze the fleeing ninja in his tracks. Tsunade was shocked that she'd yelled out without realizing it. "I will not let you hurt my Naruto-kun." Tsunade was speechless. Those were the exact words in her heart, but she was sure she hadn't spoken them yet. It wasn't until she saw Hinata chasing a kunai flying toward the gray-haired sound ninja that she realized that she hadn't spoken either of the last two statements. Sakura and Kurenai were both yelling for her to stop, but before Tsunade could react, Kabuto had charged forward and she knew that she would be too late. Kabuto had just begun the seals of the teleportation jutsu he would need to escape when he noticed the kunai racing toward him. He instinctively jumped to the side to miss it when he suddenly realized he had been given the perfect opportunity. Landing on one foot, he launched himself back at Hinata, who was in fast pursuit of the kunai she had thrown at him. Kabuto knew that all he had to do was debilitate this girl, and the other three would likely be so busy trying to save her that they wouldn't be able to chase him until he was already gone. He formed his chakra scalpel in his right hand. All he had to do was throw a knife-handed strike at her throat across her body so she would dodge to the inside. The scalpel would slice open her jugular vein and he would be able to escape while everyone was busy trying to save her. He executed the strike perfectly, but instead of simply sidestepping the attack, Hinata swung her arm in a wide arc to parry his arm too far away for the scalpel to hit and began to counter with a palm strike to the stomach. Knowing that he had to finish this fight fast, he jumped, flipping over her arm. All he had to do was land behind her and make a quick stab for her lungs. As long as he didn't kill her instantly, they would have their hands full and he could get away. Twisting in mid-air so he would land facing her, he lunged forward. However, Hinata had stepped through with her strike and was able to continue the motion, spinning around and intercepting his strike with a crescent kick that sent a jolt of pain through his wrist. She followed through with the same palm strike as before. Had just been able to barely twist away from the strike when pain hit him in the stomach. Without thinking, he jumped back into the sound of the other ninjas beginning to charge him. Without even looking first, he jumped into the air, flipping and twisting so that at the top of his arc, above where Hinata stood, he was upside down in the air facing the oncoming women. He breathed in and blew out a large cloud of poison gas. Sakura, who was the farthest behind in the mad rush to join the fight, stopped, skidding with her heels, and brought her forearm up over her mouth before she replaced it with a handkerchief. Tsunade jumped high and back, landing behind Sakura, also covering her mouth with her arm after taking a deep breath while in the air. Kurenai, who had been first to charge after Hinata, knew she was in trouble. She had instinctively taken a deep breath and held it when she saw what was happening, but she had been slightly too slow and had inhaled a small amount of poison as she was jumping back. She jumped back again and forcibly exhaled. She landed on her back, her lungs already on fire. Tsunade's head jerked back and forth as she decided what to do. She dove at Kurenai as she yelled, "Sakura, you have to help Hinata." "No," Hinata's quiet voice came floating through the still-standing poison mist. "I said I would stop him," her steadily getting louder as she continued to speak. "And I will not take back my words, that is my ninja way," she declared. Sakura only stopped for a moment and then began to try and find a way around the mist. Seeing Kabuto performing some sort of jutsu in the air, Hinata twisted and charged for where she estimated he would land. Landing with his back to her and immediately twisting his body, the sound ninja barely avoided her palm strike as he jumped back, still feeling a sharp pain in his kidney. Doing so, he managed to clip her in the head with a stiff crescent kick as he spun around. She went down, but not before being able to land a chakra-powered palm strike to the inside of one of his knees. On the ground, he placed both hands on the affected knee, using a medical jutsu to suppress the pain. Jumping back up and using chakra from his left hand, he began healing the damage to his wrist that had been caused by her first kick at the beginning of the confrontation. Exasperated, he wondered if she had eyes in the back of her head. It was then that he heard Tsunade's order. "No." Hinata's quiet voice climbed up from her position on the ground. "I said I would stop him," her steadily getting louder as she climbed to her feet. "And I will not take back my words, that is my ninja way," she declared as she reached her feet. That was when he saw them, her eyes. His mind immediately filtered out how fierce and determined they looked, along with the grim look on her face, immediately showing him what he needed to see: Byakugan. The Hyuga family blood limit. That was how she had been able to react to him while he was behind her, and how she was able to avoid the chakra scalpels. Suddenly the sharp pains he'd felt on those near misses made sense. Her family's fighting style was said to attack internal organs. Kabuto realized that because he had known she wasn't a threat, he hadn't taken into account her specific fighting techniques. He was actually pretty lucky he had landed that kick to her head, or he would have taken a bit more damage before he could have gotten a debilitating strike. Reassessing the situation, he realized that Tsunade presumably had begun to treat the Junin who had inhaled the poison if she had sent Sakura to help Hinata. He could escape now, but if he didn't, he would have to revert to his plan of giving this girl a debilitating injury. Slowly he began to heal the damage to his stomach and kidney. That was the instant she charged palms out again. She planted her foot down with her body turned sideways from his, extending both palms out from her body, her legs spread wide and squatting in classic horse stance, shoving one palm toward him. As he stepped to her inside, attempting to kick her in the face, she allowed herself to continue her motion down and around, ducking underneath his blow in a low spinning sweep. Jumping to avoid the sweep, Kabuto brought his arms above his head and attempted to smash both of them down on the previously timid girl's head. Hinata put her whole body into the palm strike she sent to intercept the blow by extending her arm above her as she stood straight up. Seeing this at the last moment, Kabuto opened his hands and pushed chakra out his palms in an attempt to ward off her chakra-enhanced counterattack. As their hands collided, he bent his elbows and extended again, launching himself back away from her. His body had begun to ache in numerous places from the near misses of the Hyuga girl's gentle fist. "Gentle my butt," he thought. That had to be one of the most misleading names he'd ever heard now that he'd fought against it. It was still insignificant, he thought as he reached into the pouch he kept behind him for a pain suppressant. He would have to go without, he realized, because she charged him the second he began to reach behind him. Predictably she attacked him with another palm strike. He knew near misses would eventually take their toll on him. To avoid this he reached across his body and grabbed her wrist, twisting and kneeling in front of her with his back facing her. Her left palm moved toward his back, but it was too slow to prevent the tug he gave her arm from sending her over his back and onto her own in front of him. It did however manage to graze his back, causing small, painful spasms. Angry, he thought that she must send a continual amount of chakra out her palms. He was wrong. Hinata didn't waste chakra like that. She only used chakra on blows that she intended to connect, and if it was deflected too wide she would let it go to conserve her energy. Hinata rolled with the throw from her forward shoulder across her back to the opposite hip, allowing her to turn and face her opponent again with just a quick swivel of her hips. She charged back in instantly, this time hoping to catch him off guard. He deflected her arm wide again, but this time she managed to reverse the grip and turn, stepping back under his armpit, sending him onto his back. She had to jump to avoid his hands. She couldn't tell what he was doing with the chakra in his hands, but she knew she didn't want him to touch her ankles with it. On the other side of the mist, Sakura had finally gotten to the edge of it and was running around it to get back to Hinata. She berated herself again for not only running the direction the wind had blown the mist, but also along the side that it appears that sound SOB had blown out more mist. She should have paid better attention. It's the first few moments of a battle that are the most critical, she reminded herself, hoping she would be able to get to Hinata in time. Tsunade had just finished with Kurenai's lungs. She wasn't in danger of dying anymore, but she needed rest. But rest was something that Kurenai was unwilling to do while her student was battling to the death with an enemy ninja. Judging that the mist would likely clear before she could get around it, Tsunade turned to yell at the stubborn Junin. "When the mist clears I'll go save her, but you have to rest." "Hokage-sama, I can't." "You can and you will. If you don't rest here I'll knock you out myself." Tsunade looked back through the fading mist. It would be safe for her to run through if she held her breath in just a few moments. Sakura was nowhere to be seen. She hoped that the girl was okay. Currently Hinata and that infernal sound ninja were squared off looking at each other. Kabuto was breathing heavily, but Hinata was bent over, panting, almost gasping for air. From what she had been able to tell through the mist, Hinata had barely been able to keep up, and that murdering Kabuto had been slowly picking her apart. Kabuto was becoming upset. He was trying to defeat that girl while expending as little chakra as possible. But every time he sped up she matched him. He had barely been able to stay on top of in this fight and was wasting far too much chakra. He still had a whole other mission he needed to complete. The girl had coming at him so relentlessly he hadn't been able to escape. Now that the mist was thinning he would have to revert to his original plan of giving the girl a debilitating injury. It shouldn't be too hard, he had been wearing her down throughout the whole fight. He hadn't been able to give her any serious internal injuries. She always seemed to squirm out of the way when he was using his chakra scalpel, so he hadn't been able to do more than cause minor hemorrhaging and rips in her muscles. But the girl's hits and near misses had begun to give him aches all over his body. It was over now though. A couple of exchanges ago he had managed to puncture one of her lungs. The girl had impressively still been able to fight, but she'd been slowing down. He'd put an end to it now. Hinata had managed to get several solid hits in, especially when she had started leading with her left hand. She had caught him flat-footed the first time she had done it. She did it again on the next exchange and he hadn't been able to block it completely. On the third exchange he had managed to block the left hand completely, but missed the left foot that clipped him in the head. The sound ninja had excellent recovery techniques, but she could tell that the damage to his chakra circulatory system had begun to take its toll. His recovery time was dropping steadily. Hinata didn't know what he had been doing with the chakra in his hands, but she'd been extra careful to avoid it when possible. It would be impossible for someone without the Byakugan to attack the chakra's circulatory system, at least not without extensive training from someone who did. That attack a little while ago had somehow affected her insides, she couldn't breathe. He had to be attacking her internal organs. Human anatomy is fairly well known, so it's quite possible for anyone to create techniques that could damage internal organs. Hinata was no medical specialist, but the Hyuga had techniques that allowed one to affect the chakra's circulatory system to improve healing. She started sending chakra to the areas around and trough her lungs in a way that she could only describe as massaging. She needed a few moments for her lungs to begin to recuperate, so she decided to let him make the first move. She wouldn't let him get away to hurt Naruto-kun though. Desperately she racked her mind for a plan. With his recovery speed on the decline, she could probably beat him if she did things the painful way, but that was a last resort and didn't constitute an effective plan. Kabuto calculated that the damage to her lungs should have become debilitating enough by now and charged her. The mist was clearing and it was now or never. Another small puncture in the lungs should be easily accomplished now and would fit his needs perfectly. He'd have to rest a bit before engaging his target, but as long as he didn't kill the girl instantly he should get away fine. Hinata took up the charge instantly, but he was too fast. She knew she wouldn't be able to avoid the chakra in his hands this time as it sped to the other side of her chest. She leaned back attempting to duck the blow and roll backward. She wouldn't have made it if a kunai hadn't thunked into ground between them, causing him to jerk his hand back. "Stay away from my friends unless you want to get hurt." Tsunade charged through the mist holding her breath with her arms over her eyes and mouth. She had seen Hinata and Kabuto charging each other and knew Hinata wasn't going to be able to beat him. She also knew she wouldn't get there in time, but she had to try. She heard a loud thunk as she was running, followed by the sound of a body rolling, but couldn't uncover her eyes for another couple of steps. Had Sakura made it in time? It was while she was uncovering her mouth and eyes that she heard the loud voice. "Stay away from my friends unless you want to get hurt." Tsunade opened her eyes and looked to her right in time to see Hinata rolling back and then come to a stop, both feet and one hand skidding on the ground. In front of her, Kabuto had jumped back from the kunai that was embedded deep in the ground. That hadn't been Sakura yelling, that voice defiantly belonged to a man. Tsunade stepped to her right so she could keep her eyes on Kabuto and see who this new stranger was. That was when she first saw him again after 2.5 years. Naruto was standing in the branch of a tree glaring at Kabuto. "He's gotten taller," was Tsunade's first thought. Not finished growing yet, he was head and shoulders shorter than Jiraiya. He wore an orange jacket that was just like he used to wear, but it was a little too small for him. It hung high enough to show a black cloth belt wrapped around his waist several times and didn't make it all the way down his arms. Instead of orange cargo pants he wore navy blue pants that were tied with black strips around his lower legs, matching the hand wrappings that he wore around his hands and forearms. His face bore the most interesting changes though. It still bore the whisker marks on his cheeks, but his face had lost its chubbiness. He'd kept his hair short, but he was beginning to resemble the fourth more and more. "Hey Naruto." No friendly banter, no talk about old times, just a death threat? Though after all we had been through I'd get more than that. Kabuto's words snapped Tsunade out of her reverie. Kabuto had finally found his quarry, but there should be one more. It would be difficult to deal with Naruto with just Jiraiya around. Having Tsunade and her two remaining nuisances would be difficult. He wanted to keep Naruto talking, something usually pretty easy to do, while he thought up a plan. "First you attacked Tsunade Ba-chan. I told you I would never forgive you for what you had done. Did you think that attacking more of my friends would make me change my mind?" Naruto yelled the last bit out as he shook a fist. Unfortunately, his sudden rush of emotion caused him to fall off his branch. He landed in an ungainly squat with one hand on the ground. Sakura arrived just in time to see Naruto fall, and seeing the current standoff she leaned over, hands on knees, to rest next to Hinata's crouched form. Tsunade sighed, mumbling, "Baka," under her breath. Sakura struggled valiantly, if unsuccessfully, to keep from giggling. Hinata couldn't help but grin as she stood up. "Thank you," she muttered softly. Kabuto had used the pause in conversation to grab the food pill from the pouch he wore on his back. He knew he'd need it if he was going to fight Naruto. He almost dropped it when he saw Naruto fall. Sighing loudly, he put the pill in his mouth and began to chew. Knowing that his mission stood a better chance of success if he could get Naruto to chase him away from everyone else, preferably away from his instructor who had just walked out of the tree line behind him to yell at his student, Kabuto searched the recesses of his mind for a way to do so. A grin lit up his face as he performed the medical jutsu he'd created that would allow him to turn the food pill he'd just eaten into energy he could use instantly to enhance his speed and strength. He had come up with a way to get Naruto to chase him. It was perfect. All he needed was to get that Hyuga girl to attack him again. Turning to Hinata, who had stood up, but still seemed to be breathing heavily, he began to implement his plan. It's a good thing the idiot here showed up. You were about to die a disgrace, proving your own uselessness, Kabuto taunted her in a snide voice. I can't decide if it's ironic or just plain sad that the Hyuga heiress would be the weakest member of the clan, he continued. As if you could actually stop me from doing anything I wanted, I am insulted. Kabuto yelled, his tirade continuing. So tell me, are you willing to die for your ninja way? The sound ninja asked with a snide grin. It takes more strength to live something than it takes to die for something. Hinata's reply came out between gasps for breath. Before Hinata could continue, Naruto yelled out. Hey, your fight with her is over. I'm your opponent now. No, came Hinata's somewhat weak yell, interrupting what was likely to become a long speech. I said I would stop him, and he won't lay a finger on you. Hinata said as forcefully as she could. But Hinata, you aren't in any shape to fight. Let me fight him for you, Naruto replied worriedly. I will not take back my words, Hinata said more forcibly, leaving the other half of that statement they both knew unsaid. Naruto's brow furrowed. He didn't know how to deal with this situation if it was a matter of Nindo. I will not allow you to fight, Hinata-chan, Tsunade's voice rang in. Ignoring her, Hinata turned to face Kabuto. You were right about one thing. It is a good thing that Naruto showed up, she said, her words coming more easily now. When he left, I promised myself that I would get stronger too, so that when he got back I could show him how strong I had become. Hinata's words seemed to strike a chord in Naruto's heart, causing him to turn to face her, whispering her name questioningly. Hinata continued on as if she hadn't noticed. I also promised that I wouldn't use my full strength until he was there to see it, Hinata stated, her voice growing more even and confident. It was going to be difficult to defeat you without it, but my ninja way is to never to take back my words. Hinata finished her statement at almost a yell, her breath now coming evenly and easily. Sakura was stunned and speechless as the once seemingly incapacitated Hinata walked away from her in perfect fighting condition. Tsunade and Naruto both leaned back in shock at the sight, while Jiraiya just stood there appraising Ly. All of their attention was suddenly shifted back to Kurenai as she started to grunt as she moved to stop her one-time pupil. Kabuto couldn't believe the idiocy of it all. They were going to let him fight her without protest. Everything would work according to plan now. He had trouble hiding his grin. Hinata reached down to her waist and pulled the jacket she was wearing over her head and threw it away. All eyes were suddenly drawn to her chest. Hinata hadn't expected to take off her jacket that day and was only wearing a small spandex tube top. This girl must have tipped the puberty fairy, Jiraiya thought as he examined Hinata's no longer weighted down. Everyone's head jerked in unison toward the sound of a loud crunch when Hinata's jacket hit a small tree and crushed it. That is all but Jiraiya, who couldn't take his eyes off Hinata's bosom. Jiraiya almost grabbed his pad to start taking notes before he stopped himself. He would have to burn everything into memory so he could write it down in his notes later. Hinata found that the only way she could suppress her mortification at being so scantily clad was to keep moving. Everyone's eyes returned to her as she knelt down on one knee and reached under the cloth wraps around her calves and pulled out 2 more weights. Jiraiya had leaned forward, unable to keep from leering at the poor girl's posterior and legs showing through her tight pants, when he suddenly found Naruto's elbow in his stomach. The heavy-sounding thump of the weights hitting the grass left everyone, including Kurenai and Kabuto, speechless. Kabuto was still in a state of shock when he found himself nose to nose with the fierce-looking Hyuga girl, then found himself cratered in a tree. He barely came to his senses as she came charging him with a look of fierce determination more fitting a monster than her smooth features. Jumping to the side to avoid her palm, he heard the tree he had landed against explode into a shower of splinters. Stunned, Kabuto just stood there as the splinters scratched him, his face betraying his shock, until the sharp pain of her not-so-gentle palm strike filled his side. Kabuto attempted to jump away, but was forced to step back to avoid a branch from the tree that had just exploded. Jumping over the tree as it fell, Hinata sent Kabuto flying again with a kick to the back of the head. Able to react for the first time, Kabuto rolled with the fall, coming up facing and again charging Hinata. He threw a kunai straight at her. Suddenly she was in the air coming down toward him. With a smirk he threw 2 handfuls of shuriken stars at her. He stood there watching as the girl began a spin, but was forced to step back as the swirling sphere of chakra that surrounded her in the air sent the shuriken in several different directions, one of which was straight back at him. Continuing to spin as the cloud dissipated, Hinata swung one of her legs out, chakra being expelled from it like it had been in the Kaiden divination whirl she had just used. The attack hit him in the side of the jaw, undoubtedly breaking it and sending him flying past Tsunade, who had to lean away to keep from getting hit. The sound ninja flew right over Kurenai's body, but she couldn't take her eyes off of her former student. She hadn't seen her fight so determinedly since that first Chunin exam. And she'd never seen Hinata with such a fierce face. It almost frightened her to see the most kind and loving girl she had ever met become so fierce, but she knew why. Even the most docile of animals will become vicious for that same reason. Hinata began to slowly saunter toward the vile sound ninja in the most intimidating way she could manage. Her face showed a grim, fatal determination. Kabuto saw all of this as he pulled himself out of the crater in the tree. Quickly Kabuto began the seals he would need to escape. Seeing her mistake too late, Hinata began to run at her enemy as she reached into her leg holster for the last of her shuriken stars. Hurriedly she threw her last 3 at the departing ninja. Tsunade had to jump out of the way of one of the stars that weren't heading exactly toward the target. The gray-haired ninja disappeared in a puff of smoke just before one of the stars embedded itself in the tree just behind where his head had been. The other 2 struck other trees behind it quickly thereafter. Other people might have yelled or cursed at this, but Hinata just came to a stop and began to look and feel dejected while everyone else just stared in varied states of shock. Naruto, however, almost instantly came to his senses. "Arrow Sennin, we have to go after him," Naruto yelled as he began to move toward where the sound ninja had last been standing. As everyone else finally registered what had just happened, Naruto stopped and faced Hinata. "That was incredible, Hinata, you've gotten really strong. You'll have to let me train with you when I get back." His words brought a familiar warmth to her cheeks. Naruto didn't notice because he had turned his head back to his eccentric master. He was breathing in to yell at his sensei, who had yet to move from the spot he was standing. At least he wasn't still leering at Hinata. "Naruto-kun." Hinata's voice rang out. "Let me go with you." Her voice came out in a rush. "Go for it," Sakura's inner voice cried out. Kurenai grinned and chuckled slightly on the ground as she mentally cheered Hinata on. Looking back and forth between Kurenai and Hinata, Tsunade realized what she hadn't been told. Realization dawned on her and her face lit up with a grin. Scheming soon followed. You do realize it's a trap, don't you?" Naruto asked bashfully. Tsunade and Sakura did a double take and Hinata just let out a slight gasp. Jiraiya put one hand on the back of his neck and let his head droop down, resigning himself to the explosion that was about to take place. "What?" Tsunade yelled. "You were about to intentionally walk into a trap." Tsunade came stomping up to Naruto. Hinata seemed to cringe for Naruto. Naruto, however, simply began to laugh nervously as he put one hand behind his head. "Well, that's the thing about traps," he began to relate. "They keep your enemy overconfident because they know that you're walking into their trap. They'll show you things that they shouldn't or stay when they should run away, because you're in their trap and they figure they've got you, so it doesn't matter. Then all you've got to do is beat them up." Tsunade had almost reached Naruto when she turned and bellowed at the man that was supposedly his instructor and guardian. "You are going to let your student knowingly walk into a trap?" she shouted incredulously. Furrowing his brow and leaning back as if searching for the right words, he never got to speak, because he was interrupted by his student. "It was his idea," Naruto piped in. "We weren't able to find Orochimaru's hideout, and the 3 years until he can take over Sasuke's body is almost up. So we figured if we let Kabuto lure us into a trap at his base, we could find out where it is and take Sasuke back." Naruto's words all came out in a rush. While Sakura was touched, Tsunade only got angrier. Bellowing at her fellow Sannin, she began her lecture as if she was addressing some very obnoxious students. "Your job wasn't to search for Sasuke and Orochimaru. I have other people doing that. When I asked you to take Naruto-kun, I asked you to keep him safe from the Akatsuki. Now I want you to tell me what reason you could possibly have to take the person you were protecting into a dangerous situation like that. Why were you not only taking him deep into enemy territory, but knowingly walking into a trap with no chance for support?" Loudly taking in deep breaths, she waited for his reply. Trying to interrupt, Naruto began to speak. Tsunade ba-chan, we don't have much time, Kabuto will. Naruto was stopped by Tsunade's hands squeezing his cheeks as she brought her face within an inch of his. Hinata gasped, leaning back and bringing her arms up in a warding gesture. Tsunade began to speak quietly and in an artificial voice, much like what one might use to address a baby or small child. Naruto-kun, I need you to be quiet now so I can hear your sensei explain to me why I shouldn't kill him. The last two words came out in a squeak. Jiraiya put both of his hands out in front of his chest, fingers splayed as if to hold her anger back as Tsunade turned to glare at him. You see, he was so dead set on finding Sasuke that searching for him was the only way I could keep him from running out on his own, he began to explain, stuttering. Seeing that his explanation so far didn't appear to be enough, he continued. It's been a great training tool. The boy has learned a great deal about gathering information from people, tracking and spy nets. Still not enough to placate the woman, he began to stutter worse. Showing how something would help find Sasuke and bring him back was the only way I could get him to pay attention to lessons on tactics and learn techniques that he thought were boring. He was laying it on a little thick, but he was trying to avoid the nuclear pounding he felt coming on. These kids would tell their grandchildren about how the fifth Hokage had pounded him so badly that he couldn't look at a woman without feeling pain for months. Makeout violence number 5 would be delayed for a year. Tsunade could tell that Jiraiya was just trying to avoid another one of her butt whoopings, but what he said was likely in essence true. He had been tracking Sasuke to keep the reins on Naruto so he could protect him. He likely was also hoping that Naruto could save his friend where Jiraiya had been unable to save his own. That was all well and good, but he was not taking her little Naruto-kun into this trap. She put her foot down. Alright, but you are not walking into this trap, she yelled. But, oh ba-chan. Naruto began only to be cut off by an irate Tsunade. You are ordered by your Hokage to return to Konoha immediately. That is final. But, Naruto began again. I will not have my plans sabotaged by two overeager, hormonal-driven, overgrown teenagers. Tsunade yelled, cutting him off again. This time she really did put her foot down, crushing a rock in the process. Naruto and Jiraiya seemed to be satisfied by this, or at least set back. Naruto knew that Orochimaru wanted him dead bad enough to set this trap again. He'd have another chance to find Sasuke. Jiraiya didn't want his butt handed to him, so he elected to act contrite until it appeared Tsunade had forgiven him. They were all about to turn and leave when Hinata, her hands held nervously in front of her, bowed low. I'm sorry Naruto-san, I failed again, she said humbly. Clearly taken back, Naruto lost his balance for a moment. Ah, what do you mean, Hinata? The dumbstruck boy asked after he turned to face her. I let him get away, after I said I wouldn't let him go. I made a mistake and he got away. I failed to keep my word. The poor girl seemed to be on the verge of tears. Naruto looked confused, but the pain of another affected him the way it always did. He responded in a loud voice. You don't need to apologize, you didn't promise not to let him go, you just said you wouldn't let him go and you didn't. He got away because of luck. Besides, if you kept him from running it would have ruined the plan, Naruto answered in a rush. You did great, you kept your word and fought him with everything you had. You'll get him next time for sure, unless of course he runs away as soon as he sees you. Ha, ha, ha. He chuckled nervously at the girl who was beginning to look up in front of him. Yeah, I bet you scared him so bad he wets his pants the next time he sees you. Naruto kept going, apparently not seeing the blush on the poor, embarrassed girl's face. Knowing that it would take some effort to stop the boy before he ran out of gas on his own, Tsunade left the boy to his barrage of compliments while she made sure Kurenai was ready to travel. Naruto hadn't been able to stop by the time she was done, so she had needed to yell at him to get moving or be left behind. Not smart enough to be left behind with the blushing girl, they had both hurried after. Naruto had spent the whole trip grilling the two young ladies for information about themselves and their collective friends. Things had gone well and Hinata had reacted positively under the attention. Everything was going wonderful until Naruto had asked Sakura for a date. Tsunade had been about to go back and pound him for ruining her plans, but Sakura had used the strength she had gained training under her to send Naruto into a tree. This had earned Sakura several compliments from the boy. Unfortunately, one was to compare her to old lady Tsunade. which had earned him another trip crashing into a tree courtesy of Old Lady Tsunade Aeronautics and Pain Limited. Tsunade spent most of the trip scheming. Now that she knew what Kurenai had been holding back and she had Naruto back, she could begin working on Hinata's confidence issues. But was she acting out of her concern for her subordinates as Hokage, or was she playing the scheming matchmaker? Jiraiya, seeing the crooked grin that adorned her face, kept quiet. He was even too scared to get out his notebook to take down notes for his book. He would just have to go over the recent events in his head until he burned them into memory for his next book. It was late afternoon when they finally came to the gates of the hidden village of the Leaf, Konoha. The trip had been mostly uneventful since the confrontation with Kabuto. At least it was uneventful as one could expect when traveling with Naruto. When they'd broken camp that morning, Naruto had attempted to casually walk away with Jiraiya in another direction, under the auspices of continuing his training. Naruto rubbed his ear. It still hurt when he thought about how Tsunade Ba-chan had grabbed it. He had waved goodbye, saying something about the girls being close enough to home not to need them. Then he'd waved arrow Sennin on, saying it was time to get back to training. Just as he was turning around after that was when she had clamped onto him. "Where do you think you're going?" Tsunade had asked him. He had tried to play it smooth, telling her that he and Jiraiya had to finish the training mission, and he had assumed that she and the girls wouldn't need them anymore. The old lady had just grinned and said that he'd be finishing his training in Konoha. He didn't know what to say at that point, so he'd simply said that they couldn't do that and looked at Jiraiya for support. Jiraiya had woken up to a nightmare involving Tsunade's wrath and evil, maniacal chuckle, and then, even before breakfast, he saw the boy tempting fate, trying to defy that same woman. Consequently, when the boy looked at him for support, he left him to deal with the she-devil alone. Hinata had been about to cry when she heard Naruto was about to leave them. She hadn't realized how badly that she had missed seeing him. Before he left, she had only been able to talk to him a few times. She spent most of their time together, watching him from a distance. While he had been gone, she had thought about him every day. When she had wanted to give up, she would remember that he never gave up and work even harder to be like the one she loved so desperately. On missions, sometimes she would remember the Chunin exam and Naruto cheering for her, and no matter how many mistakes she made, she just couldn't stay down. Then there was the mission to recover Konohamaru. That boy had used Naruto's no jutsu and taken both of the men holding him. After that, there was no way that Hinata would give up trying to save that boy, no matter how strong the woman Chunin was. And then when that Chunin had beaten them all, she could have sworn she heard Naruto's voice and she just couldn't keep her body down. Hinata couldn't remember exactly how that fight had ended, but Konohamaru had visited her every day at the hospital until she was able to leave. She didn't think she had missed him so much, because of all the times she had seen him while he was gone, but seeing him about to leave after she had gotten her hopes up for another day with him, had nearly brought her whole world down around her. She had been trying to say something that might convince him to stay when she had seen Tsunade grab him. As upset as she was at seeing Naruto hurt in any way, she couldn't help but be relieved when she realized that he would be staying with them for another day. Hinata had then buried her irritation at Sakura when she began giggling at Naruto. Apparently she thought it was funny watching someone else get lectured by her sensei. Hinata didn't think it was funny, but when she heard that Naruto would finish his apprenticeship while in Konoha, she was ecstatic. It had taken her most of the trip back to remove the whitest car salesman grin from her face, and it still kept coming back unbidden periodically. Now that they were just outside of the gates of Konoha, she didn't know what she would do. She wanted to confess her feelings to him. She wanted to be there for him so he never had to face anything alone again. She wanted to share her feelings and the rest of her life with him. There came that grin again. But she couldn't confess her feelings to him like that with everyone around. She'd had to get him alone, but she didn't know how to do that. And would she even have the strength to talk to him if they were alone? She never had before. And would he just tell her that he just wanted to be friends, or worse, that he was still in love with Sakura? Her heart would burst if he did. She wanted to run away just thinking about it. Jiraiya had been forced to endure the kid's angry glare for some time after they broke camp, but that couldn't faze him through the glee at knowing that Tsunade's ire was no longer directed at him. He had pulled out his notepad and pencil as soon as they had started walking and began to jot down notes from what he had seen the day before. After his quiet giggling had been interrupted by Tsunade's maniacal chuckle for the second time, he had begun taking notes on that as well. He had to be sure to capture in words the way her head tilted back, how her hands seemed to gravitate to her hips and how her upper body seemed to pulsate slightly. After the 5th time, however, he also began to make plans for Naruto's funeral and burial. He had just finished with his notes as they reached Konoha's gates. His timing couldn't have been better. Now the only question was whether he should make a quick research run before making arrangements for the night or begin seeing to Naruto's final arrangements. Seeing that his glares did him no good, Naruto started to think of another way to get back at the perverted Sannin. That was when he first saw it. The predatory grin Hinata had plastered all over face. After seeing what Hinata was capable of in combat during the Chunin exam and the day before, Naruto couldn't help but be afraid of that grin. It seemed to reach something primal in the base of his spine, sending cold shivers all the way back up to the base of his skull. So unnerved that he was unable to continue plotting or strike up much conversation, he began to practice the very complex start of the latest jutsu the perverted hermit had taught him. He was able to do it successfully about half the time without the seals, but every time he saw that grin he would be stopped dead in his tracks. A couple of times he could have swore he even saw her licking her lips. Naruto had forgotten that sometimes women could be scary. They were walking through the gates when he came back to reality. During her lecture that morning, Tsunade Ba-chan had promised him some special training while he was back. It had better be good, he thought. Maybe it would be that super strength thing she did. She'd also mentioned something even better than training. He couldn't think of what could be better than training. Was there a 2-for-1 sale at the Ichiraku ramen stand? Just as they were all passing through the gates, Jiraiya and Naruto started turning to go their own separate ways. Tsunade could see that Naruto was about to make a beeline to the Ichiraku ramen stand and Jiraiya was about to go wherever he went to go peeping. "Hold it right there, you two." Tsunade's voice was commanding and brooked no disobedience. "Where do you two think you're going?" Tsunade asked. Cutting them off before they could get more than a couple of words into their explanation, Tsunade continued. "I want you both to come with me. I want to hear about how your training went, and Jiraiya will need to give me his report," she told them. It would also be a lot better than the paperwork she was going to have to do. Turning to the now somewhat tired and slightly amused Junin, Tsunade continued. "Kurenai, you will need to come with us to the hospital." Before Kurenai could object or Hinata could quietly question why, Naruto spoke up. "I thought you already fixed her up, Ba-chan. Why does she need to go to the hospital?" Seeing the confusion on Naruto's face and the unasked question in Hinata's eyes, Tsunade answered calmly. "Kurenai needs to have her blood tested to make sure that there are no more toxins in it. That can't be done without some special equipment, so I cannot be sure I got rid of all the poison she inhaled. She'll also be prescribed a detoxifying agent and will have to go on a detoxifying diet for about a week." "Detoxifying diet?" Naruto asked. "It just means that she'll be eating mostly vegetables and drinking a lot of water and juice for a week," Sakura answered helpfully. "Blia," was Naruto's only response as he thought about only eating vegetables. Kurenai remembered the last time she was poisoned and agreed with him. Hinata felt guilty. She had decided to go with them as far as the hospital, but a part of her went so she could be with Naruto and not because of her concern for Kurenai-sensei. The more she thought about it, the more embarrassed she felt and the more she moved to the back of the group. Even at the back of the group, her eyes seemed to gravitate toward the object of her affections. His jacket was a bit too short for him, and didn't quite come down to his waist, leaving Hinata with an unobstructed view of the way his pants hung over his butt. When he stepped forward, the fabric seemed to be pulled tight, giving her a look at his muscular, toned buns. She found the sight somewhat hypnotic. Somehow she found herself wondering what it would be like to feel them. She took a quick step forward to catch up and moved her hands slightly forward from her waist before she realized what she was doing. Suddenly embarrassment flared up in her cheeks and she stopped dead in her tracks. She shook her head violently side to side to clear her mind. That was when she first noticed it. Hinata thought it was strange that people would react this way to the Hokage. All around her she could see cold stares. Children pointing at the Hokage were quickly grabbed by their guardians and shushed. Suddenly she felt small, like a scared little girl. She felt out of place. She heard their voices. "Leave them alone. Don't stare at them. Don't look at them." Hinata couldn't understand their reaction. "He's back," she heard several say to each other. Hinata remembered that Naruto always referred to Jiraiya Sennin as Ero Sennin, pervert Sennin. Could he really be such a pervert that everyone in Konoha would have this reaction to him? She was asking herself this question when suddenly the answer became painfully clear to her. That was when she first heard one of the villagers utter, "monster." Even in her earliest memories she remembered that word, and how they had always called him that. "Naruto," she murmured. Now, thanks to Kabuto, she understood why they called him that. For the first time she understood how deeply they hated him. She remembered her father telling her stories about the Kyuubi, the nine-tailed demon fox that had nearly destroyed Konoha and killed so many people. Everyone had lost someone. She remembered her father's voice as he talked about it. Everyone hated that monster. Tears began to form in her eyes until her motions suddenly changed track as if someone had just flipped a switch. What's wrong with these people? Naruto wasn't the Kyuubi, Tsunade had said as much. That monster was trapped inside of Naruto where it couldn't get out. By the very act of breathing, Naruto was protecting all the people of Konoha from that monster. He was a hero. They all knew, and yet they hated him. They all knew. Hinata fumed, and yet they had never told her. Just as Kabuto had said, they never told anyone of her generation. Did Naruto even know? How could the people be this stupid? How could they hate him, and how could they not tell us the truth? These questions swirled in Hinata's mind, making her angrier and angrier. Finally she remembered something her father had told her, back when she was training her to be the heir of the clan. A person is smart, Hinata. People are dumb. They are prejudiced, excitable, easily frightened, and even easier to manipulate. That is why we must always control what appearance we present to the masses. Hinata had never been so outraged in all of her life. She wanted to beat some sense into these people. She wanted to tell them that Naruto was a hero. She would force them to understand. Just as Hinata was about to make good on her intentions, she heard his cheery voice yelling to her. "Oi, Hinata, are you coming?" Naruto asked while jumping up and down, waving at her. During her reverie, Hinata had fallen a ways behind. Naruto, it appeared, had been the only one to notice. He had stopped as the rest of the group walked past him. "Coming," she yelled as she jogged back toward him. When she caught up, they both jogged back up to the group. "What's wrong?" Naruto asked as they caught up to everyone else. "Nothing," was her only response. But something was definitely wrong. Everywhere they went the people acted the same. It didn't let up. Naruto was trying to talk to her, but she didn't even register his voice. The cold stares were just too loud for her. Naruto didn't seem to notice or was used to being ignored. He didn't realize how strange it was for Hinata not to silently hang on every one of his words. Kurenai noticed, however. They were approaching the hospital when Naruto finally realized that his effort to distract Hinata from whatever was bothering her was a failure. Kurenai had been watching the girl become more and more distraught, was about to take the girl aside and ask her what was wrong, when she suddenly burst into tears. Hinata couldn't take it anymore. She stopped dead in her tracks and started to cry. Shocked, everyone else stopped in their tracks. Before anyone could question the bawling girl, she began to apologize profusely. Naruto-kun, I'm sorry. I didn't know it was this bad. If I'd have known, I would have. Hinata's courage failed her at that moment. What would she have done? Would she have been his friend? Would she have tried to have been more? Would she have told him she loved him? She searched her heart for the answers to these questions, as well as something safe she could say, while her cheeks attempted to create a new shade of crimson. Touched by the young woman's concern, Naruto reached out and tentatively placed his hand on her shoulder. Haltingly, Naruto began to speak to the now sobbing girl. "It's okay, Hinata, as long as You shouldn't be apologizing to that thing, young mistress." The whiny voice of an old man interrupted Naruto. Naruto's hand slipped off her shoulder as he turned to face the source of the unwanted interruption. Ironically, of the 6 sets of eyes that turned to face the old man, Naruto's probably bore the least malicious intent. Jiraiya was furious that the show had been interrupted. It could have been good material for the next Makeout Paradise. Tsunade was furious that someone had interfered with her plans, the fact that she hadn't done anything yet notwithstanding. The inner Sakura was bellowing about a ruined romantic moment while the outer Sakura just glared. The fact that Kurenai was trying to come up with a hypnotic illusion nasty enough to suit the person that had just ruined Hinata's moment shined through her eyes. It was a look that could stop a man's heart and leave him dead on the pavement. The old man, however, was unaffected if the smirk he wore on his face as he leaned on his gnarled cane was anything to go by. He wore a loose-fitting white robe with black trim and gold stitching. His gnarled face looked like worn leather and his white hair was almost the same shade as his eyes. He was not only a member of the Hyuga clan council, but the village council as well. In just a moment these faces that now promised violence would be showing cowed and impotence. He loved the feeling he got when he watched people become subservient to him. Not even the Hokage or the other Sannin would dare say or do anything to him, and relished the looks on their faces as they realized this. That monster, he began to say just before something happened to him that hadn't happened to him since he was a child. He was yelled at. Naruto's face seemed stoic, but the perceptive could have made out the pain he felt in his eyes. Even the most perceptive, however, have trouble seeing through their preconceived notions. Consequently, even though perception is considered a Hyuga's strength, the old man couldn't see it. It's a sad statement on human nature, but it is truly amazing what a human being can get used to. Naruto had dared to hope that things would have gotten better after his absence for 2.5 years. Apparently he would have to prove himself, something he felt he was now equipped to do. He was going to do what he always did and ignore the man, but he remembered yelling at Hinata to get her to stand up to herself during the Chunin exam. He had said that it made the people watching her angry when she didn't talk back to Neji. But how could he face the strongest girl he knew if he was unwilling to do the same? He was about to send back a retort when something exploded inside Hinata. She hadn't been half this angry when she had faced Kabuto, but after watching the villagers silently revile the one she loved, this old man had brought her to critical mass. She had heard of people seeing red when they got angry, and maybe there had been a bit of red tint to that first white flash. But now all she could see was black and white, mostly white. Due to their unusual properties, Hyuga eyes could be scary. But if the look she fixed on that old man could kill, half of Konoha would have been turned into a smoldering crater. She had been the Hyuga heiress for long enough to know who the old man was, she even knew his name. But at this point the quiet, unpresuming Hyuga heiress was gone, and in her place stood a woman who had been scorned for the last time. She was locked on target and was going to explode all over him. "How dare you?" Hinata's voice was so venomous that some of those who were present at the incident still state that it was an attack intended to kill the old man where he stood. Hyuga Kuri nearly fell off his cane. Naruto, being the one closest to her, nearly wet his pants. The remainder of their party suddenly turned to face the girl, shock evident in all of their faces. We'll assume that it was the poison still in her system that caused the experienced Junin, Kurenai, to become weak at that particular moment and suddenly drop to her knees. Naruto is not a monster, he's a hero. Just by breathing he's been protecting this village from that monster since he was a child. Hinata screamed at the old man. The day he was born, actually, the gray-haired Sannin supplied softly. Sakura turned and stared at the back of the old Sannin's head. Hinata's eyes were still trying to incinerate the old man. Kurenai was looking at Hinata and Naruto while Jiraiya and Tsunade were enjoying the look on the old man's face. Naruto, however, couldn't seem to lift his eyes from Hinata's feet. She knew. That fact seemed to reverberate in his head. Not only did she know, but she was defending him. Did that mean she didn't hate him? He didn't dare look up at her. The old man was flabbergasted. In all his years no one had ever dared speak to him in this manner. He would have never guessed that that girl would have ever had the audacity to speak to him this way. Had he been less outraged, he would have probably taken it as proof that he was right in backing her as heiress during the last council meeting. Pushing on his cane to stand up straight in attempt to overcome the natural stoop to his back, Councilman Kuri stood in a way that he hoped was regal. "Young lady, do you know to whom you speak?" the councilman asked. "I appear to be speaking to a senile old man, Senator Kuri," was Hinata's reply. Few know it and fewer still know when it actually began, but several generations ago Hyuga clan councilmen began referring to themselves as senators when not in public. Hyuga Kuri looked like he'd been doused with a bucket of ice water. The old man sputtered. He wouldn't stand still for this. There was no way he would let that little girl talk to him this way. "I don't know who broke the law to tell you about it, but it appears they gave you the same propaganda they have been giving us for years," Kuri stated while staring accusingly at Tsunade and Jiraiya. "But the truth is that there is no seal that could have protected that boy from the demon. It would have eaten his soul the very moment that it was trapped in his body." So, Hinata was about to quote the 5th Hokage directly, but Jiraiya beat her to it. Lunging forward, he lifted the old man off his cane and brought him to eye level. The councilman's feet were dangling in the air as Jiraiya began to yell at him. "How dare you suggest that my prize student would sacrifice the life of any child, let alone..." Jiraiya was livid and it showed. He'd almost said something he shouldn't have. Shaking the man, Jiraiya continued his tirade. "I've examined that seal myself and it's a work of genius. That fox is right where the fourth left it, and it is completely incapable of ever doing anything to harm Naruto." With one more shake, Jiraiya forced himself to let go of the man, leaving him to fall unceremoniously on his backside. Apparently oblivious to the altercation that just transpired, Naruto finally managed to look up at Hinata. His eyes betrayed him. Naruto hadn't looked as vulnerable the day he was born. The sight nearly brought tears to all four Kunoichi's eyes. Had Hinata not been so full of murderous intent, she would have probably burst into tears and wrapped her arms around the poor boy. As it was, the sight sent a chill up her spine and forced the anger out of her in an almost audible rush. No longer driven by her anger, Hinata couldn't help herself and smiled shyly at the boy who seemed so vulnerable as he stared at her needily. Seeing that sign of acceptance, Naruto felt energized and a smile lit up his face. She knew and she didn't hate him. Kurenai and Sakura were trying not to cry at the sight. Jiraiya wanted to take out his notepad, but knew it would ruin the moment. Tsunade did, however, shed a tear and was about to rush forward and embrace the boy when that annoying man chose to make himself known again. Hyuga Kuri wasn't as spry as he used to be. It took him a few moments to start to get back on his feet. He was outraged that someone would dare to manhandle him. He would not stand for this disrespect. The council would hear about this, he raged to himself as he stood up more painfully than normal. He couldn't do anything to the Sannin right now, but that girl, it was her fault this had all started in the first place. He had the Sannin cowed before she had spoken up. He would let her walk away from this thinking she had won. "It seems," the old man began in the calmest offhand manner that he could manage, "that I was wrong to have supported you, young mistress." All eyes turned back to the man and stared at him in outrage as he continued. "Apparently your father was right. You are most definitely not suited to be the heir to the Hyuga clan. Yes, I believe I will be happy to support your sister as the heir." The truth be told, his decision to back Hinata in the Hyuga council had nothing to do with her competence or that of her sister. He had simply mouthed the fear that they all felt. Hanabi was simply too young to take over the position. The Hyuga would look silly replacing the heir with one so young who had yet to do anything notable enough to prove she was the more worthy. They wouldn't have to do anything official until Hinata was 17 in a year or so, and if Hanabi hadn't done anything notable enough, a few things could easily be arranged since their father wouldn't be expected to step down until Hinata was nearly 30. There was plenty of times to deal with things without the embarrassment that of turning down one heiress for another so young and unproven. But right now Senator Kuri was quite happy that the council had overruled him. The look on this girl's face as he so brazenly informed her would be priceless. "I suppose the announcement will be made in a few days, once your sister has had time to rest from her most recent mission. Then you'll be joining the Branch family, I suppose." The vindictive old man was right, the look had been priceless. However, he was yelled at again. He was not quite so surprised this time. He should have expected it, he told himself as Naruto bellowed at him. "I won't allow you to do that to her." Naruto's voice came out in rush. "And how, pray tell, do you intend to stop it?" the old man asked through his snide grin. Senator Kuri was beginning to chuckle to himself as Naruto obviously searched for an answer. Hinata's heart melted hearing Naruto stand up for her, while most everyone else just sighed, waiting for him to come up with an answer. Naruto had spoken without thinking. He knew it was right and had therefore promised to do it without thinking about execution. Naruto placed one fist under his chin in a thoughtful gesture as he began to think about it, ignoring the sighs and chuckles he got. He totally missed the girl swooning off to his side. Suddenly Naruto began to step forward to enter his own nice guy pose to promise that he'd find a way. He was thrown off balance mid-step, however, when Tsunade began to casually address someone who had just walked up. Quickly regaining his balance, Naruto turned to face her and was about to yell at her for ignoring him when he was about to say something important before he saw who it was that she was talking to. Hiyashi had to force Hanabi to go to the hospital. She had insisted that her wounds were insignificant. Her wounds weren't life-threatening by any stretch of the imagination, But the girl didn't seem to understand that you didn't have to be at death's door before you got treatment from a doctor. He'd told her that the masses were easily frightened and quick to jump to conclusions. We can't have one of the Hyuga clan head's daughters running around injured. It would make the Hyuga appear weak, and that could cause the people to lose faith in the Hyuga's ability to protect them. Even after that explanation, he'd still had to all but drag her to the hospital. Hanabi and Hiyashi had just left the hospital. Hanabi was unhappy with the situation. She couldn't stand to be babied, and she really couldn't stand to be treated as weaker than her sister. Most of her life she'd been compared to her big sister. She'd done her best to be as good as and better than her sister. She'd beaten her sister in numerous fights, she'd become a genin years earlier than she had, and still she was treated like a baby and dragged off to the hospital for minor injuries. She'd seen her sister in greater pain from practicing, and no one forced her to go to the hospital. No, Hanabi was not happy at all. They had not traveled 2 full blocks from the hospital when they ran into an argument. Several members of the Hokage's party were glaring daggers at Senator Kuri. What had Senator Kuri gotten himself into this time, Hiyashi wondered. Kuri was notorious for getting into trouble. The Hokage, however, was looking at him lazily. At least she had some sense of decorum, unlike the barbarians she had deemed to surround herself as an escort. Hopefully they hadn't embarrassed Konoha with their actions. Hiyashi had no idea why she had elected to take his weakling daughter, but at least she would know how not to embarrass herself in public. Grumbling to himself, Hiyashi approached the group so he could defuse this situation. The Hyuga clan didn't need an incident right now, not especially with the changes that were about to take place. He expected to have to interrupt the conversation, so he was completely unprepared for the Hokage's statement. "That's an interesting bet you're making there, Hyuga-san," Tsunade said as casually as she could muster. Hiyashi never gambled, not with money or anything else he did. His actions were always calculated to give him exactly the results he desired without being subject to chance. Consequently, he had no idea what the Hokage was talking about. That confusion and his surprise at being addressed while trying to think of a way to quietly break up this scene is probably why he couldn't come up with a response more intelligent than the barely audible, "Huh," he let slip. Tsunade continued on, as if she had missed the clan head's confusion. "I realize that Hanabi is stronger than Hinata was at her age, but most shinobi never become as strong as Hinata is now, and she doesn't appear to have reached her limit yet. Are you sure that that's the way you want to go? Or is this a change in Hyuga clan doctrine, sending the strongest members to the branch family?" Tsunade's predatory grin hid the gears that were turning in her head. That maniacal laugh that she'd been making since they had met up with Naruto chose this time to escape her lips. That grin and chuckle Tsunade had made was unnerving Hiyashi. He wondered what she could have up her sleeve. Had he known what Tsunade was really planning, he would have undoubtedly been irate. Suddenly Hiyashi understood what she was talking about. Senator Kuri had undoubtedly told her that Hanabi was going to become the heir. Seeing his other child for the first time, Hiyashi had to fight down his fury. If that man had told Hinata before the announcement, he would have him removed from the council. No, for this breach of protocol he'd have the man become part of the branch family. Quickly making sure he had kept his composure, Hiyashi spoke, "Unfortunately, she is currently more powerful than Hinata." "Really?" Tsunade said smoothly in her best hustler voice. "Then I'll have to talk to her Junin instructor to make sure she is able to take the upcoming Chunin exam. I'll expect to see great things from her." This time Tsunade and Jiraiya were both chuckling. Hiyashi didn't know what to say. He was confident that he knew which of his daughters was stronger, and he was upset that the Hokage would dare suggest that he didn't. Tsunade's demeanor, however, made him hesitant. He was about to collect his family members and leave when the self-important senator decided that he wouldn't be ignored. "Really?" the senator said in his most innocent voice. "While we definitely expect great things from our Hanabi, I don't see why you would if you were only comparing her to Hinata." Ignoring the self-important, pompous snob, Tsunade looked Hiyashi in the eyes, a grin gracing her lips, and continued. "So Hyuga-san, do you think your daughter's ready for the Chunin exam?" Clearing his throat, Hiyashi decided to bring this nonsense to an end. "I've spoken to her instructor and we both believe that Hanabi is ready for the Chunin selection exam." Furious about being ignored, Hyuga Kuri decided to get another dig in. "Unfortunately, it is unlikely that Hinata will ever be ready." Hinata hadn't been reacting to the conversation very well. Her body seemed to have a mind of its own as it brought her arms up in front of her and tried to make itself smaller. She found herself biting her finger and holding back tears at Senator Kurei's last statement. Senator Kurei would have been pleased to see the results of his taunting if he hadn't been furious for having been ignored. Naruto was shocked to see Hinata change so suddenly. One moment she had been about ready to rip the Hyuga guy's head off, and now she seemed so hurt by the stupid man's comments. Naruto couldn't understand how someone so strong could suddenly become so vulnerable all of the sudden, but seeing it, something inside of him snapped. Having been made to feel worthless as a child, Naruto understood how Hinata felt. Some would say that after suffering so much as a child he felt that no one else should have to suffer. While this is true, it's a simplification of the truth. Naruto seemed to know several things instinctively. He knew that the greatest power man could possess was the power to never give up. He knew that the most effective way to make someone love you was to love them first unconditionally. And most surprisingly, since he had never received love as a child, and sadly, possibly because of that fact, he knew that the most effective way to ease suffering was with love. Consequently, when he saw someone suffering, his heart instinctively reached out to that person. Some would say that love is the ability to derive happiness from the happiness of another. If this is true, love has a very unfortunate side effect: feeling pain and sadness from the suffering of another. Had it been Naruto alone feeling the pain he now felt in his heart, he would have simply smiled and endured it, but sometime somewhere his heart had catalogued Hinata as one of his precious people, and he wouldn't let her suffer. Just as Hinata was starting to feel like running away crying, Naruto couldn't restrain himself anymore. "What do you mean?" Hinata took the Chunin exam her first year as a genin. Naruto yelled at the stupid man. Hiashi began to usher Hanabi over toward the senator. This was exactly the type of incident he'd been trying to avoid. At least if it was only that boy yelling, people would just assume that the monster was just making trouble again. Feeling smug, Hyuga Kurei grinned and faced Naruto. In the voice he used to lecture people like they were children, he replied, "It's true that Hinata took the Chunin selection exam the first year she was a genin, but she obviously wasn't ready, as evidenced by her performance. She was obviously carried by her teammates, both of which are now Chunin, while she isn't. Further, she hasn't taken the exam since they both became Chunin. She's obviously too weak." "She's not weak," Naruto yelled. "Hinata's the strongest girl I know." Jiraiya winced seeing the same vein pop up on Tsunade's and Sakura's heads. "Maybe she's strong by your standards, but to the rest of us." Suddenly Kurei's lecture was interrupted by the deep rumbling belly laughter of Tsunade and Jiraiya. It had been a long time since Hyuga Kurei had been yelled at, but he couldn't remember ever being laughed at, especially not to his face. Shocked, he didn't really know how to react. Further, he couldn't figure out what they could possibly be laughing about. Before she had finished stifling her laughter, Tsunade turned to Hanabi and said, "It appears you'll be having some stiff competition in the exam, since you'll have to face your sister." Without hesitation, Hanabi answered, "I can beat her." Her father was only a second behind, saying, "I was unaware that she had a team." Well, it's been hard to find genin in her weight class, but now that her last teammate has arrived, the three of them will be taking the exam together. Tsunade replied casually, as if it had been her plan the whole time, as opposed to the truth that she had just made the decision on the spot. "Weight class?" Hiashi asked, lifting his eyebrows in a manner that was both questioning and disapproval if the statement had been meant as a slight. "Strength," Tsunade said hurriedly. "It's just that now that there are only a couple of genin that are as strong as Hinata, so it's been hard to find a team that she won't unbalance." "Well, that's certainly nice of you to say, Hokage-sama, but it's unnecessary," Hiashi replied brusquely. "We all know the truth," he continued. "Consequently, Hinata will not be taking the Chunin exam this time." "That's brilliant," Jiraiya exclaimed. "If you keep Hinata from competing, there's no chance that people will be able to tell that you passed up the stronger heir for the one that was easier to control. And since she hasn't participated in the exam recently, no one will expect a thing." Hiashi began to show how flustered he was about this whole situation as he got a little red around the collar. Thanks to that vile senator, he felt like he'd been pounced on. Well, he'd deal with that old codger later. "It's nothing of the sort," Hiashi retorted. "We simply don't wish to have further embarrassment tarnish the Hyuga name." Taking up the challenge, Tsunade replied as casually as she could. Unfortunately, her poker face was legendary. It had never fooled a soul. Grinning ear to ear she exclaimed, "Well, I guess it would be embarrassing if your new heiress got her butt handed to her by the old one." Unable to help himself, Jiraiya burst into laughter. Hiashi put his shy daughter to shame as his entire head turned an incredibly bright shade of crimson. Infuriated, Hiashi yelled, "Fine, and who would my daughter's teammates be?" "Why, my apprentice Haruno Sakura and Uzumaki Naruto," Tsunade replied, daring Hiashi to say something about it. Hiashi didn't object, but through grinding teeth asked, "And their instructor?" "Jiraiya," Tsunade answered simply. Forcing a laugh before Jiraiya could complain, the self-important Hyuga councilman stepped toward Hiashi, finally closing the gap between them. "We see what you're trying to do, but it won't work. The Chunin exam isn't a test that a person's teammates can pull someone through, as Hinata's already proven. And the exam is in just under 2 months, not even Jiraiya-sama could teach her enough to pass the exam, let alone beat Hanabi." "Fine," yelled Jiraiya, who was not about to have his teaching prowess questioned. He had trained the 4th Hokage and now Naruto. If he could teach Naruto anything, he had the patience of a saint as well as being a genius, if he did say so himself. "If Hanabi wins, I'll train her as well." "What is this, some kind of bet?" Hiashi yelled. "Do you expect me to decide the destiny of the Hyuga clan on a gamble? I suppose you expect me to agree that if Hinata can surpass Hanabi in the exam, that she'll remain the heir and Hanabi will join the branch family?" "No," Naruto and Hinata had yelled as one. "If it means that Hanabi won't have to be a branch family member, I would gladly take her place," Hinata managed to stutter out, now feeling abashed after being so bold. Turning to face Hinata, Naruto began, "Hinata, no. You don't have to." His voice caught in his throat as he saw her face. She was almost crying, but had steeled herself against the consequences of her decision. She knew what she was sacrificing and she was willing to do it. He couldn't let her be branded with that cursed seal, but how could he tell her not to help someone, especially if that someone was her sister? "Actually, the terms are much stiffer than that," Tsunade replied. "If Hinata wins, she will no longer be your daughter." "What?" several voices echoed as one. "You expect me to risk one of my daughters on a bet?" Hiashi asked, shocked. "If you know your daughters, it wouldn't be much of a risk," Tsunade replied. "Besides, it's not as serious as it sounds. She can keep the name until she's married, and if you wish, you may continue to provide for her welfare. Nothing needs change except that I will have final say over her welfare until she's of age." "Why would you even want this?" Hiashi asked, scared for the first time in this whole conversation. "Well, I'm the last direct descendant of the 1st Hokage, and I don't have an heir," Tsunade replied. She didn't really care about an heir, though she knew it was something that Hiashi could understand. The fact that she had never had children did sadden her at times, but she was already making plans to spoil her grandkids. Besides, it wouldn't be much of a bet if once you knew who was the strongest, you could make them the heir. "What?" Hiashi and Kuri said in unison. "It's not a bet unless you risk losing something," Tsunade said, as if explaining something that anyone 2-year-old should know. And who knows, maybe she had been gambling that long, no one had ever dared to ask. "In this case, if you win, you make the strongest of the sisters your heir, but if you lose, you won't be able to. Therein lies the risk you take being wrong." Hiashi nodded his head as if he'd just learned something profound. Now that he understood gambling, he saw that in this case it was a way he could be even more right than he already was. He liked that, and for the first time he felt what a gambler felt when he was dealt a full house. He couldn't lose. He already knew what would happen. Kuri had made many bets in his life, not that they'd ever been fair, and he saw something a little different than Hiashi did. He saw an opportunity to have the Hokage over a barrel. Now Hyuga Kuri wasn't the type of person to ever be upset with himself. So it didn't even occur to him to berate himself for not seeing this Hokage's weakness sooner, despite how obvious it seemed now. He immediately decided that he would use it to his utmost advantage, starting with getting back at the girl in front of him. He knew the perfect way to get back at a girl that would side with a demon against him. Coughing to get everyone's attention, the conniving old man began to speak. "It occurs to me that the terms of this bet are hardly fair. If Hinata wins, we lose a promising clan member. Now he says she's promising," Naruto grumbled to no one in particular. "But when," Kuri coughed as he corrected himself, "I mean, if we win, we gain nothing we don't already have. We can and are already making Hanabi the heir, and while the offer to allow one of the legendary Sannin train her is of great value, It hardly compares to the life of a clan member. Tsunade had known that this was coming. If it had just been Hiashi, she could have probably gotten him to agree to a bet this one-sided, but she didn't think she'd get away with it while the councilman was present. "Well, what stakes do you propose then?" Tsunade asked, trying not to cringe at the hammer that she knew was about to fall. "The demon child's life," Kari answered before he was given a free one-way trip across the street and into a post-compliment of Old Lady Tsunade Aeronautics and Pain Limited. "What did he say?" Tsunade said, her fist still extended as she turned to face Hiashi. Jiraiya couldn't help but shiver, having been on the business end of that fist before. Seeing the old fool twitching on the ground, he hesitantly raised his voice. Tsunade, maybe you should just stick to a single finger on men that old." Tsunade just ignored him, but Naruto and Sakura both shivered at that comment. Seeing this, they each turned to the other and pointing, shouted, "When did she?" they both said before they turned away embarrassed. Hinata and Kurenai both looked confused. Kurenai, however, didn't look jealous. Jiraiya couldn't help but chuckle at the kids. Meanwhile, Hiashi was quite pleased, if a bit jealous. He wouldn't be able to get the simple satisfaction of beating that old man, but he was pleased that he had gotten what was coming to him. No, Hiashi amended, he was starting to get what was coming to him, but he would have to see to that later, as he had an irate Hokage glaring at him. Most sane men have a natural instinct that when they see an irate woman moving her face toward them as if to bite their face off, they try to placate them. Perhaps it was his Hyuga pride or the rush of gambling for the first time, but Hiashi felt emboldened. "I think you misunderstand what the councilman meant," Hiashi began. "I better have." Tsunade interrupted warningly. "But he makes an interesting point." "What?" Tsunade said angrily. "If I lose, my family loses a member, it's only fair that if we win we gain a member." "Naruto would become a Hyuga?" Tsunade said as she quirked an eyebrow. "He'd have to be a member of the branch family, but yes," Hiashi replied. Hiashi quietly congratulated himself. He'd finally be able to do something to get back at the demon that had taken away so much of his family. Before Tsunade could thank Hiashi for his graciousness in offering one of the village heroes his eldest daughter, because how else was Naruto to join the Hyuga clan, Naruto shouted out, "I'll do it." Naruto's voice drowned out Hinata's protests. Naruto finally found a way that he could keep both Hinata and her sister from getting that killer seal placed on their forehead. If he could make Hiashi agree to the bet, then all he had to do was make sure Hinata proved that she was stronger than her sister in the exam. He'd train with her until she was the strongest Hyuga to ever live, if that's what it took. It took Tsunade a moment to realize that Naruto had just agreed to wear the Hyuga's mind-destroying seal, not marry Hinata as she had been about to arrange. "I won't allow it," Tsunade yelled. "I said I'd do it, Tsunade Ba-chan. I won't take back my words." Naruto yelled over both Tsunade and Hinata's protests. "Do I have to use my finger on you again?" Tsunade yelled at Naruto. "I told you before that only a fool gambles with his life." "I'm a ninja, Tsunade Ba-chan." Naruto yelled back. "Every day I put my life on the line, not only for what I believe in the people I care about, but for people I don't even know." Taking off his Hite-8, the ninja forehead protector that all ninja wear, he continued, "The only difference here is that I have less to lose." Then in an action that everyone present would remember for the rest of their life, he offered it Tsunade and yelled, "If you're saying that I can't risk my life to protect one of my precious people from that cursed mark, then you're saying that I don't have what it takes to be a ninja." Looking at him, Kurenai could see that that boy had grown. He's becoming quite the man, Kurenai thought. He'll be good for Hinata. Naruto Baka has grown. It seems he understands what it means to be a ninja better than I do. Sakura mused. He may one day be Hokage. Every day I see a little more of you in him. Fourth, Jiraiya thought. You'd be proud of the boy. Jiraiya wished that the fourth could be here to see what Naruto had become. You're wrong though, Naruto. Jiraiya though. It has nothing to do with being a ninja, it's about being a man. Tsunade didn't know what to do. She couldn't let Naruto risk his life like this. The Hyuga seal is embedded deep in the brain. Officially the seal only sealed the Byakugan after death, but unofficially it could be used to both torture and kill by any Hyuga main house member. It was how they kept the branch house subservient. It was also a crime, but because of how important the Hyuga were to Konoha's defense, no one had ever challenged them about it. If they put it on him, they would use it to torture him until one of them finally killed him on purpose or on accident. And Naruto probably knew it. This isn't like that, Naruto, Tsunade pleaded. You aren't taking your life in your hands, you're leaving it in someone else's. You just said that Hinata and I would be teammates, Naruto responded softly. Teammates have to trust each other. They have to trust the other to put their life on the line to protect them. Then in a yell Naruto finished. If you're saying that Hinata isn't worthy of that trust, then you better take our hite-ates from both of us. Hinata didn't know what to think or feel seeing Naruto put so much trust in her. Didn't he know that she always failed? How could he trust her? Suddenly a terrible thought occurred to her. He didn't trust her, he just didn't care. Maybe he even wanted to become a Hyuga, if that's what it took to have a family. Naruto, you can't. Hinata squeaked. You don't know what that seal can do. Hinata's voice was panicked. Naruto's reply came out stark and cold. Yes, I do. It can kill me. But why? Hinata begged of him. Because I trust you, Naruto replied calmly. I wasn't kidding when I said that you were the strongest girl I know. I don't believe you will fail. But I'm not strong, Hinata replied. I always mess up. Hinata couldn't bring herself to meet Naruto's eyes. She held her hands in front of her and turned her chin into her shoulder. No matter how hard I practice, I can't seem to ever do anything right when it counts. Hinata's statement was cut off by a sniffle as she began to cry. Ever since Kiba and Shino became Chunin, all I seem to be able to do is get people hurt. I keep having to be moved from team to team, Hinata said between an ever-increasing amount of sobs and sniffles. Internally she begged him not to make her say more. When Naruto didn't speak up immediately, she begged him out loud, please don't let me hurt you too. Hinata, a lot of people have reminded me that I'm not perfect. Naruto began reaching out to put his hand on her shoulder. His hand brushed her chin, causing her to look at him. Most of them were very rude about it. Naruto chuckled slightly before he continued. One of them told me that I make a lot of mistakes, and I fail a lot, but she told me that I was a proud failure, because I have the strength to get back up. Naruto made sure to look her in the eye before continuing. Hinata, that's what I believe real strength is, and I know you have it. Now that Hinata had made eye contact, Naruto felt he could let go of her shoulder. Hinata, I believe that if you have the strength to get up every time you fail, you will always succeed. I saw your fight with Neji. I saw you keep getting up no matter how badly he hurt you. You never gave up. That's what real strength is, Hinata. Tsunade Ba-chan might hit harder than you, and all sorts of people might do all sorts of things better than you. But the strongest ninja isn't the one with the most chakra or the best techniques. The best ninja is the one that keeps getting up until they've won. Tsunade wanted to cry. Why did Naruto have to grow up? Why did he have to be willing to take risks like this for the right reasons? She could have stopped him from doing something stupid, but how could she stop him from doing something right? Thinking fast, she realized that she could still use the marriage trick. She'd just spring it on him Hiashi as when he was by himself. Are you sure you want to do this, Naruto? Tsunade asked in the steadiest voice she could muster. Yes, Tsunade, Naruto replied. And turning back to Hinata, he made his nice guy pose, complete with his confident grin, and said, I know you won't fail, forestalling the objections that Hinata wanted to make. Naruto was right, Tsunade thought. Hinata couldn't lose, and even if she did, Tsunade would make sure Naruto didn't get that mark. He didn't have a Byakugan to seal. She'd let them know that she knew what else that seal did, and that if they tried to put that mark on her Naruto-kun, she would do something about it. She'd put an end to it and see that everyone responsible faced punishment for treason. Grinning maniacally, she turned to face Hyuga Hiashi. You have yourself a bet, she yelled, entering her version of the nice guy pose. Her version, however, involved extending her hand out to shake on a bet. Hesitantly, Hiashi reached out to shake her hand. Hinata watched in terror. I accept, her father said coldly. Hinata felt her world shattering. She would be responsible for the death of the person she loved the most in this world. Hinata seemed to deflate as she watched a woman she had previously thought she could trust making a deal with her father that would doom the greatest man she had ever known. She felt powerless to save him. Feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders, she was betrayed by a woman she thought she could trust, the Hokage. So, how will we determine the winner? Hiashi asked gruffly. Well, the final test of the exam is a tournament, Tsunade stated what they already knew. It would seem like the logical choice. It would be a simple matter to arrange for the two of them to face each other. It will have to be in the first round, Hiashi said brusquely, while giving Hinata a disapproving look. And if there's a need for an elimination round, we may wish to just let them through to ensure that they're able to fight in the finals, Tsunade said while giving Hanabi an appraising look. In truth, she was trying to figure out how much she weighed. She was wearing a fairly conventional ninja uniform. It didn't appear to have places to hide weights. The advantages to using weights during speed training are immense, but it's primarily known for the advantages in strength and stamina. The Hyuga fighting style relied primarily on their Byakugan and skill. They seemed to feel superior because their fighting style couldn't be copied and that it was powered by finesse and not physical force. Tsunade doubted that they degrade themselves by using a training technique known primarily for enhancing strength. Hanabi's GHI was sleeveless. There were definitely no weights on her arms. Hinata's jacket probably weighed more than the little girl did. The dignitaries will probably want to see this particular match as well. Tsunade trailed off thinking before she began to chuckle. Her chuckling grew louder and louder until suddenly Hinata couldn't take it anymore. "What are you laughing at? This is Naruto's life we're talking about," Hinata yelled, furious at the woman that seemed to have betrayed her. "I'll be out of debt," Tsunade exclaimed happily. "All the people I owe money to will be there. I'll be able to go double or nothing. Even better, I'll be able to rake in." "What?" Naruto yelled out. "You can't bet on Hinata, you'll jinx her." "What are you talking about, Naruto?" Tsunade yelled back cheerily. "Not even I can lose this bet," Tsunade exclaimed excitedly. Kurenai and Hinata were thoroughly shocked. Sakura couldn't restrain her laughter, and Jiraiya tried with all his might not to laugh. Tsunade ignored them all. She was far too excited by the prospects of winning the biggest bet of her life. Coughing, Hiashi interrupted them. He knew the Hokage's luck with gambling was horrifically bad. That must be why she thinks Hinata is stronger than Hanabi, he thought. She must just be comparing their size. Well, she'd learn it's not just the size of the fighter that determines their strength, especially not with the Hyuga's Jukin, gentle fist. "So I suppose the winner will the one with the first knockdown," Hiashi said simply. In truth, he didn't like having his authority questioned. He knew what was best for the Hyuga as well as his children, and he didn't like having anyone, even the Hokage, interfering with that. He would get this bet settled and leave, so that when it was all over he could teach her not to interfere with things that she did not understand. "No," Tsunade answered as if shocked that he'd even suggest such a thing. "Didn't you hear anything Naruto said?" Tsunade asked. Seeing Hiashi's confusion, which was quickly turning into anger that he should have to endure that monster's presence, let alone listen to it. "The strongest fighter isn't the one that's less injured or the one that knocks the other one down the most. The strongest fighter is the one who is standing in the end. If the fight is going to determine who is strongest, then it will have to be a fight to the last man." Tsunade stopped, reconsidering her wording. "Or in this case last woman standing," Tsunade amended. "Very well, then it's settled, unless of course Hinata doesn't make it to the final round," Hiashi stated. "I wouldn't worry about that much," Tsunade replied. "But what should we do if the little one doesn't make it? Should we just, 'My name is Hanabi and I will make it through this test all the way to the end and win your stupid tournament?" Hanabi yelled angrily. "That's enough Hanabi," Hiashi said softly, but still silencing his daughter. "I propose that should one party not make it to the finals, that party loses." Tsunade didn't like it. She was comfortable that if Hinata faced her sister in a one-on-one fight Hinata would win. But the first two portions of the exam could be pretty random. The stronger party could run across an even stronger team and leave those who are weaker to get through. She had hoped to avoid the issue and just make sure that they fought in the finals, even if one of them didn't make it. It was a chance she didn't want to make, but with Naruto and Sakura with her, Hinata should make it through. "Well then, if you're sure Hanabi can make it to the final test, it's settled," Tsunade replied with as much confidence as she could project. "Very well then," Hiashi replied. Seeing his daughter glaring at the Hokage, Hiashi thought it was best that they finally leave. "We shall be off then," Hiashi stated casually as he steered his daughter away from everyone and back home. He'd leave Senator Kuri where he lay and let him or whatever Good Samaritan happened by to take care of him. It was obvious to Hiashi that they thought that they could teach Hinata some kind of stamina technique to keep her fighting longer than Hanabi. The Hokage obviously didn't understand that since it was the internal organs being attacked by the Jukin, the first person to go down would always lose. There is no way to protect or toughen the internal organs. No amount of stamina will allow someone who is brought down by the Hyuga's gentle fist to win. They would just be too badly hurt to put up enough of a fight. That was why all sparring matches only went to the first knockdown. Well, if they wanted to go that way, now was just as good a time as any to start increasing Hanabi's stamina. By the time the Chunin exam arrived, he would ensure that his daughter could outlast any genin in Konoha. Before Hiyashi had gotten out of yelling distance, Tsunade turned and yelled to him. If I find any strange marks on my new heir when I win, I will be very displeased and I will thoroughly punish whoever is responsible. Hiyashi didn't even turn around when he yelled back, "Yes, Hokage-sama." He'd known that she wouldn't allow him to put the seal on his child if she won. That was probably what the misguided woman had wanted all along. He knew he should feel outraged at the interference, but he couldn't shake away his relief that he wouldn't have to put his other child through that yet. He couldn't shake the part of him that was saddened that now there would be no getting out of doing it once the Chunin exam was over. The Hokage's party walked the rest of the way to the hospital in relative silence. Tsunade kept making thoughtful sounds as she went over their plans. When they finally arrived, Tsunade sent Sakura in with Kurenai. Still grinning, she turned to face the two remaining genin. "Will you two make sure that you get enough rest tonight, because you'll be back on active duty starting tomorrow?" Tsunade beamed at them. "Alright," they mumbled in unison. "Hey, Naruto, what's with the depression? I thought you said you trusted Hinata with your life," Tsunade said loudly. "You weren't lying, were you?" Tsunade demanded. "No ma'am," Naruto shouted, straightening up from the slouch he'd been in. "And Hinata," Tsunade turned to face the quiet girl, "make sure you don't beat your sister as bad as you did Kabuto." "Yes ma'am," Hinata shouted in reply, similarly straightening her back. "Good. Your father's going to expect me to patch her back up if you beat her too badly." "Yes ma'am," Hinata replied again. "Good, now I expect to see you in my office at 9 tomorrow morning," Tsunade continued. Suddenly struck with inspiration, Tsunade grinned and added, "Oh, and Naruto, I want you to escort Hinata from her home tomorrow, so if you don't know where it is you better have Hinata show you." Not getting a rise out of Naruto, she began to be concerned until he hesitantly spoke up. Tsunade ba-chan, what team will we be?" Naruto asked, completely throwing Tsunade off. "What do you mean, Naruto-kun?" Tsunade asked. "I mean that we can't be Team 7 without Sasuke, so what team will we be?" Naruto asked, only hesitantly saying his former teammate's name. Chuckling, Tsunade yelled dramatically, "From now on you will be Genin Cell Alpha." Tsunade spread her feet wide and with one hand pointed to the sky for dramatic effect. Oblivious to the sheer hilarity of it all, Naruto pumped his fist back and cheered. Unable to take it anymore, Hinata started to laugh. Her laughter was therapeutic, and after all the stress she'd just been through, she couldn't seem to stop. For a moment Naruto found her laughter hypnotizing. He'd never heard Hinata laugh before. He sat there staring dumbstruck, seeing a side of his new teammate he'd never seen before. He waited until her laughter had died down a bit before he offered to go training with her. As they were walking away, he offered to spend as much time training with her as she wanted. He promised that he'd help make her the strongest Hyuga that ever lived if she wanted. "Well, the girl is certainly going to be spending a lot of quality time with him, but I wonder if this is really what she had in mind," Tsunade joked to herself. With Hinata believing that Naruto's life was in her hands, she'd probably open up a can of kick butt on her sister. Poor girl probably has no idea how big of a whoopin' she is about to receive. Perhaps she would have to set up a couple of fully stocked surgical rooms in the stadium, just in case things got too brutal. Grinning to herself, Tsunade thought that she had been dealt two of a kind that looked like they were forming up to be a full house.